The Tennessee Titans probably had one of the most disappointing playoff losses of the 2021 NFL playoffs. 3 interceptions by Ryan Tannehill, and their whole entire season, which they even got the AFC's number 1 seed, was all for nothing. So let's break down what they can do to improve on that season, because they looked really impressive in the regular season, but they fell to the Cincinnati Bengals in their first playoff appearance of the season. So let's break it down and see exactly what the Tennessee Titans can do to improve and be able to actually make a deep playoff run. What's up, guys? I'm Tyler Coker, and I'm your host for today's episode of Today with Tyler. I hope you enjoy. We'll first start with their free agents because that's what we do now. So their free agents are Ben Jones, a center, Jayon Brown, a linebacker, Anthony Firkser, the tight end, Rashawn Evans, the linebacker, Harold Landry, who they just re-signed, so luckily he's not much of an issue anymore. He signed a long-term contract, and David Quessenberry, the guard. So not very many free agents for them, which is a really good sign, and overall just a good situation to be in going into another year after the playoffs. Ryan Tannehill is a serviceable quarterback, and while he's not going to win you any games, with the Cincinnati Bengals loss aside, he doesn't really lose you any games either, and even then, if you watch my film breakdown on those 3 interceptions, they weren't all necessarily his fault. So while Tannehill isn't great, he isn't a bad quarterback either, so you kind of had to build around Tannehill, but he's not someone who you need to improve on automatically and right now. A.J. Brown is a great wide receiver, and Julio Jones is finally healthy. He'll be good. He'll be very good when he's finally a healthy member of this team and can consistently see the field, since he makes some great catches when he's actually healthy, so you can only imagine what he could do with a full healthy season. They really could use another wide receiver, but Nick Westbrook-Ikhine isn't horrible, and they do have a lot of young guys who they can kind of rotate around and see who's the best. So it's not a pressing need to get another wide receiver. They could greatly use a tight end with the departure of Jonnu Smith, though. He went to the Patriots and is being underused there, but they don't really have anyone who's a big red zone deep threat like how they did with Jonnu Smith. So I'd like to see them target a tight end at some point, whether it's through the draft or through free agency, but I don't want to see them break the bank to do so. They never have to think about running back, luckily, because Dante Foreman had a great year. Dontrell Hilliard was pretty good. Jeremy McNichols was pretty good. And then, obviously, Derrick Henry's Derrick Henry. King Henry is fantastic, and if he keeps doing what he's been doing without getting hurt, he honestly might have a case to be one of the best running backs to ever play the sport. Their O-line was ranked 16, which is kind of surprising considering how much they run the ball. But when you break it down and really look at the statistics, it's more their pass protection that makes them ranked 16 and not their run blocking. As much as they crush it for the run blocking, they really aren't very good on the pass block, so they could use guard help, and if they really were trying to improve and they were given the luxury of best player available, I could like them to go for a left tackle, but that's in more of a perfect world since they do have other needs that are more important, and they don't really have a hole at any place in the offensive line. Moving on to their defense, it got much better since last season, but it still has some room for improvement. They're below average as a secondary, but that's not due to their safeties. Kevin Byard had a great year, and Amani Hooker had a great season as well. So they have one of the better safety duos in the NFL, and that's a really good thing to work with, but their cornerbacks last. Janoris Jenkins and Christian Fulton had average seasons. They could really use Caleb Farley to come back and be healthy, but the issue is he had health concerns coming into the draft, and then he got hurt again during the regular season. So I would like them to also maybe attempt to get another corner, just because if Caleb Farley is going to be the guy you're relying on, and he already has a history of health, I would have a lot of concerns, and so I'd like to see him move for another corner. The rushing defense is pretty impressive, though. They only allowed 3.6 yards per carry, ranking 4th in the NFL. While they don't have any standout players in the box, they all come together as a unit to get the job done, which is way more notable than just having one really good player, kind of like how the Steelers have this year with TJ Watt. Their edge rushers, they're effective, but they could use linebackers and a nose tackle to really get that much better. So I would like to see them get a coverage linebacker, especially because their pass game is weak, especially when you consider that they don't really have any linebackers who are good at coverage. So their positional needs, their top 5, as I diagnose them, are corner, then guard, then defensive tackle, then linebacker, and then wide receiver. So not horrible, especially since there is a good corner situation where they are in the draft. Guard is something you can get in a late round. The 4th round is kind of the haven for guards. Defensive tackle is also one of those later round picks you can get, and there's some good free agents that are defensive tackles. Linebacker is going to be a little tougher. There isn't as much linebacking depth as you would like to see in a draft this year. And then wide receiver. There's always good wide receivers to go around, and the draft is very deep this year. An ideal draft that I wrote down is Trent McDuffie in the 1st, the Washington cornerback. He's the better of the 2 Washington cornerbacks, and I really like what he puts out there. He's a really good zone defender, and ultimately, I think he's going to be very successful there. If Kaiir Elam manages to fall or something like that, I would really like to see him take Elam, but Trent McDuffie will be a great pick for them. And then Channing Tindall in the 3rd round, the Georgia linebacker. I'd really like to see him up that box presence and be able to really provide a good coverage defense. So focusing on the secondary, focusing on your box defenders that can cover, that would be a really good thing for them. And ultimately, they have a lot to work with, and they can only go up from here. Their division is somewhat weak and continues to get weaker with things like Carson Wentz leaving the division. So the Colts don't really have a clear path at quarterback, and the Titans are in a really good spot. So I'm interested to see what they do, and ultimately it does come down to, can they manage their personnel well enough to finally be able to make that deep playoff run, since they do have the talent. That's undeniable. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Untitled Podcast. Look for the next one for the rest of the AFC South.